I was a first-year teacher in West Virginia, crawling above dusty ceiling tiles, completely clueless, out of my mind, dragging Ethernet cable. I didn't know what I was doing. A month before, I had been looking for a teaching job, but the only job I could land, even though my dream job was to teach maybe third, fourth grade, I was given half-time middle school computer technology. To add to that, 2 weeks into the school year, I was told that I would be made full-time by extending the school day with half-time afternoon kindergarten. Quite a mix. So you might be wondering what I was doing above those dusty ceiling tiles. The year was 1995, so if you can go back in your head to that time period. An amazing invention was sweeping the country and creating catastrophes in schools across the nation called the internet. And this school didn't know how to tackle the beast. They saw this guy that might have a chance to do this internet thing, this email thing, and get them on board. I was in the dusty ceiling on a Saturday, clueless beyond belief, pulling that cable. And I was scared. That's how I started my teaching career. Well, it was a Saturday, about the fourth Saturday of the school year in September, and I'm up there alone. I've got the doors propped open because in West Virginia, in September, it's hot. There's no air conditioning. And I'm up there pulling cable, don't know what I'm doing, and I hear this voice. Before I heard that voice, though, a few days prior, I had made a phone call. I had a friend down in Washington, D.C. named Jeff. Now, Jeff and I had grown up together right here in Rochester, and he was the guy that got me through calculus in high school. He went on to college in poli-sci and was now working for the NSA. So I thought for sure if anybody would know anything about this internet beast, my friend Jeff would. When I called him, he said, "I have no idea." I knew I was in trouble. So I'm up there on that fourth Saturday, and I hear this voice. And I pull back that ceiling tile, and I look down with this frazzled, dusty, dirty look, and there's Jeff. Except it wasn't NSA Jeff. It was 12th grade Jeff from my second period middle school technology class. And he's looking at me like, "What are you doing up there?" And I said to him, "Do you have any idea what this internet thing is?" And to my surprise, "Oh yeah, I know all about it. Yeah, no problem." Get the ladder and get up here right now. I found my savior. Jeff came up there, and we spent a few hours pulling cabling. The next weekend, Jeff started recruiting other Jeffs. And there were 3 Jeffs. And the following weekend, there were 10 Jeffs. By the end of the year, we had wired an entire school of 300 computers, brought them onto the internet age. Everybody in the school knew email. Sounds like something we take for granted nowadays. And I was awarded for being an innovator in technology. Jackpot. You see, sometimes as teachers, we take a moment and we think we have to know everything. We're teachers. We're not experts. We don't always have the answer. Sometimes the toughest thing for us as teachers is when we don't have the answers to close the space between our own abilities and our goals, or help students as well achieve the space between their abilities and their dreams. So, a few years after living in West Virginia, we're natives of upstate New York. My wife and I grew up in this area. And my wife was pregnant with our second child, and we decided we wanted to come home to our families like most of us do. And I came back up to here. And I was given that fourth grade job that I dreamed about. Every August, elementary school teachers go through kind of a mental game. You start having the nightmares that come with the beginning of the school year, and some of you that are teachers know that, right? And we're anticipating one thing in the mailbox, and that is the letter with our class roster for that upcoming year. I anticipate it more than the tax return, and I look at it like Christmas, because each one of those names is a gift, a beautiful thing, because each one of those names will contain a story and an experience unique like no other. So there I was a few years ago in my driveway having Christmas in August, as I did exactly what I do with the wrapping paper at Christmas time, just started ripping it all open, tearing that envelope open. I pull out the name roster and I start reading, and I am shocked. The first 5 names all had the same last name. Well, we're instructed in situations where we get awkward class lists to give the school a call, so I called the secretary immediately. See, I figured maybe cousins moved to the area and they placed them in the same class. Maybe it was a homeschooled family and they wanted, all the group to be together. Maybe it was a secretarial error. It wasn't cousins. It was quintuplets. I might be the only fourth grade teacher that's ever had quintuplets in a classroom together. 3 girls and 2 boys. I knew nothing at the time about the words cerebral palsy. I was about to. Much like that word, the internet, down in West Virginia, it was foreign to me. But one of the boys had cerebral palsy. Now, when you met this young man, which we do a meet and greet before the beginning of the year, I was struck by a few different things. The first thing he did was hug me. You could tell his heart already. He was a smiler, wasn't hesitating to talk. He was strong, a big boy. But some other things were very noticeable too. He was scared to death of stairs because his depth perception was challenging. His joints didn't move the same. He had stiff joints and walked at a different gait. Athletics were difficult for him. Now, 4th grade's an interesting year. A lot of children begin to become self-aware of who they are. In other words, they start recognizing their strengths and they start recognizing their challenges. And after about 3 weeks of school, I began to see frustration. There's a big jump in writing, in mathematics, between 3rd to 4th grade. And this young man was struggling with that. So I called his parents because it's so important to have a team approach to education. They're wonderful people. They came in, we talked about it, and I found out something amazing. This young man had never heard the words cerebral palsy either. Wow. See, they wanted him to feel like everybody else, which was a great idea, but he was becoming self-aware, and they were realizing it too, and they were seeing that frustration at home. So we talked it over, and we decided that it was time to teach this young man about it. I started doing some searching. I talked to his occupational therapist, his physical therapist, his vision therapist, his physical education therapist, a lot of therapists. And we started looking for resources, videos, books, all those things that would help. And we found this many, zero things that would give us a tool for teaching. That's a challenge. But I'm a teacher, and I live for creative moments. So we talked it over and talked to this young man, And we decided to write a book about his life, journaling and documenting every little bit of his day, from what happens at home and school and after school and friendships. And as we wrote this book, I found something out. On page 16 of his book, he revealed one thing. He has a goal. His one goal that he identified was he wants to become a police officer someday. That's a tough order, because sometimes the space between our abilities and our goals can be so vast. I didn't know what to do. Much like back in West Virginia, I had to think a minute. And much like when I had Jeff back in West Virginia, I asked him what to do. You see, sometimes as teachers, we have to be learners. So I asked that young man, well, what do you need to do to become a police officer? And he said one thing. Perfect, a 9-year-old answer. I need to run to catch the bad guys. Great answer. Thought that was simple enough. We'll stay after school, we'll run. I called his parents, they were on board. Sneakers, sweatsuits, off to the track we went. Stayed after school one day. We did some simple stretches, went down to the track, and that little guy made it 200 yards before he was in pain. He was exhausted, sweating, high heart rate. And also wanted to do it again. So 2 days later, we did the same thing. Sweatsuits, sneakers, went down to the track, little stretching, 200 yards. I hit a roadblock. He had hit a roadblock, and I didn't know what to do. So I again went back to the people that had helped me before, trying to find resources. And it was an adaptive PE teacher, physical education teacher, that said to me, well, how are you stretching? And now I'm an amateur jogger. I like running, but I can honestly admit that most of my running issues probably stem from the fact I don't know what I'm doing. So I know the basic stretches. But she, after seeing what I was doing with him, said to me, no. A student or a young man with cerebral palsy needs different stretches. Oh, okay. So she spent time with this young man. And I spent some time with this young man doing these stretches. And not just that, we needed something else. We needed other students there. So I opened it up to the class. And I said, does anyone want to join? And 4 other students joined. And before we knew it, we had a team of 5 staying after school twice a week and running once on the weekends. It was wonderful. And this young man, proud of his newfound stretches, was teaching his stretches to the team. You see, I'm a teacher, but I don't have to stand at the front of the class. Sometimes I need to be a learner and take a step back. He became our leader. Now, I'm not saying it was easy, but lo and behold, with these stretches, slowly progress was happening. And after a month, he was running a mile along with the entire team. We had a giant poster in my room, and we began to do goal setting. Each time before we went out, we had a positive activity that we would do before we went out to get us in that positive mindset, and we ran. And after 2 months, we were up to 2 miles, an incredible feat. And I was so proud. And not just I was proud, they were proud of themselves and each other. Wonderful. And then somebody spoke up and said, we should run a marathon. A marathon is 26.2 miles, if anyone doesn't know that. We'd run 2. I didn't think so. But you know what, in kid world, a 5K, 3.1 miles, that could be a kid marathon, right? So I said, okay, that sounds like a good idea. So I talked to the parents, talked to the kids, everybody was on board. But we had not closed the space between our abilities, 2 miles, and that dream, and we continued to work towards it through May. The race was scheduled for the last weekend in May. And the week before the race, this young man hit 2.5 miles, but there was considerable swelling in his left ankle, and I was concerned because the last thing I want is for him not to feel the success of all his hard work. It was a gamble to close the space entirely. The day of the race came. It poured and rained. It was thunder all night long. I was worried we were going to be running in the rain. Next morning, drove to the race. It was still sprinkling, and just like magic, the sun came out in Rochester. A rarity. We got to the start line. We picked a neighborhood 5K. I always had to run with this young man because the one thing we never really accomplished was depth perception of the ground. So he needed to be told, a manhole cover's coming up, pothole, those things we had to navigate. But something amazing was happening before this weekend. He was stopping using assistive technology. He insisted on trying to write with his hands and a pencil. His grades were getting better. His mathematics were improving. His confidence was growing. He was smiling more. It was wonderful, all because we were running. Well, that May Day came, the sun parted out, and we ran. And we never stopped. At 3.1 miles, that young man crossed the finish line in 41 minutes. Yeah, to him too. Along with all the other 4 people on the team. You see, at that point, we had lost sight of the fact that it was just his dream we were chasing. All of them had a goal now. Had we shrunk the space between his abilities and his dream to become a police officer? Yes, we had. Just a little bit. The amazing thing is, words caught around, and the following year, 19 people were inspired by his story. Students, 4th and 5th graders, and 5 adults approached me separately and wanted to start training with us. And 3 times a week, we trained again. This time, we ran in the city of Rochester with a race of 2,000. For this young man, the goal now was to be shoulder to shoulder with people and lose that fear of that depth perception. He ran it in 40 minutes the next year. And all 19 of those runners and all 5 adults all completed the race as well. He never walked once. This year, the race continues. In West Virginia, I was able to close the space on understanding this beast called the internet that we take for granted nowadays. But I was able to do it and close that space in a way that I had to give up ownership of the space and allow others into my space. And in that case, it was a 12-year-old young man. Here in New York, I helped a young man by closing the space, by him allowing me to come into his space and do it with him. Will he become a police officer someday? I don't know. But I do know the dream exists. I do know we've shrunk that space down somewhat. And I challenge each one of you, whatever your dreams are, to allow people into that space to join with you. Thank you.